Yours. Madam President, honorable members, we are living in a world that became even more global and ever more connected, whether through technologies, supply chains, the way we work and the way we live. In a new geopolitical and economic reality, there are planetary challenges responding to which surpasses the capacity of any one single country. We are stronger acting together with our closest partners. Moreover, climate-related disasters are taking their toll, and the most vulnerable people living in remote or in fragile environments are often the most affected. Food security, access to health care or protection are at risk, as well as stability, peace and security. This makes global solidarity and multilateral responses to multiple complex and cross-border emergencies more urgent and necessary than ever. The Paris Agreement remains a breakthrough in multilateralism and the global fight against climate change. It continues to be the best framework to drive ambitious and cooperative climate action, thus providing hope for all humanity. For more than a decade, we have worked side by side with our American partners to design and implement the Paris Agreement. We therefore regret the new US administration decision to withdraw from this Paris Agreement. The United States have a fundamental role to play in the global decarbonization effort. Hence, we should continue engaging with the US at the state level and at the private sector level, both of whom are driving the green transition in the US. The Paris Agreement has strong foundations, but we will now need to deploy all our efforts to ensure the rest of the world continues to support it, just like we did when the US withdrew 8 years ago. Our own climate resolve has not diminished, and we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We remain committed to working with our international partners to address the pressing issues of climate change ahead of COP30. International cooperation remains our strongest ally for enhancing global climate action. We also have great concern over the US announcement to withdraw from the World Health Organization. Pandemics know no borders. Just a few years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic spread at a record speed, taking lives, damaging health, disrupting healthcare systems and economies. Effective international cooperation and multilateral action as a complement to national action are essential to protect the well-being and lives of our citizens, as well as the prosperity and stability of our societies and economies. In the face of global challenges, the World Health Organization remains a cornerstone of international health cooperation. The EU stands firmly behind the WHO and its vital work to address health crises, ensure global preparedness and protect the most vulnerable. Together, the European Union and its member states are already the largest financial contributor to the WHO. We will continue advocating for a strong and resilient WHO within the global multilateral system. We encourage all its members to work together to enhance global health, security for all, and address global health challenges through dialogue and cooperation. Finally, with the executive order to temporarily suspend all US foreign assistance program for 90 days pending review, the new administration is leaving aside a dramatic impact on aid projects all around the world. With regards to humanitarian assistance, the US Secretary of State Rubio extended the waiver to allow for the temporary continuation of life-saving humanitarian programs, including emergency food assistance, life-saving medicine, medical services, shelter, and similar. Albeit clarity to partners is often still lacking in terms of which concrete projects are considered life-saving. We believe that this approach will not benefit the US long-term interests. It can lead to worsening humanitarian crisis and poverty rates, increased instability, and other negative consequences. Negative both for the affected populations, communities, countries and regions, as well as for the rest of the international community, including for the US and the EU. This vacuum also opens the door for other, not like-minded actors to step in, those who may use this space to spread their influence and anti-Western narratives. We will continue following the US administration's decision closely and analyze their potential long-term impact. But I can already reassure you, the EU will not step back from its humanitarian and development commitments. As the biggest donor for development assistance in the world, the EU and its member states continue their efforts in addressing poverty and advancing global development. And our position as a major humanitarian donor also remains unchanged. Our aid will continue to save lives and alleviate suffering in line with the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. For us, this is humanitarian imperative. Humanitarian action is a vital public good in the rules-based international system, and it is an investment in community resilience. But it is also clearly in our own interests and security interests, as we are well aware of the negative consequences that follow a lack of humanitarian and development actions. However, as humanitarian crises grow in severity and scale, the call on the international community for collective action is more compelling than ever. This is true especially today as the humanitarian system already overstretched and underfunded. We should have no illusion of the budgetary constraints that we are all facing. The EU and its member states cannot simply fill the gap. Everyone in the international community must shoulder their responsibility in line with their economic standing. Honourable members, the executive orders and other measures adopted by President Trump on the first days of his mandate will have a serious impact on the whole multilateral system. These decisions pose a significant challenge to international cooperation, paramount in addressing the global challenges we are collectively facing, such as climate change, public health, and security threats. We all know the multilateral system today is not perfect. We know that we need to reform it, and we are committed to do so. However, respect for the multilateral rules-based order is the only guarantee to global peace, security, and prosperity. The EU will therefore remain a staunch supporter of multilateralism with the UN at its core, fostering partnership and rebuilding trust, and will continue to work with its partner around the world to this end. I thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we will begin with a round of speakers on behalf of the political groups, beginning with Mr. Staber for 2 minutes, please.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Commissioner, dear MEPs, this debate is very important and needed. It confirms that the EU is watching with great interest the last decision taken by the US administration. We are trying to understand them and understand their motives. We do not always agree with them, but we hope that in a dialogue based on mutual trust and understanding, we will be able to convince them to return to implementing common projects, because we have common global aims: security, welfare, peace and democracy, because we want more democracy and less of authoritarian rule. And the next few months will be a test for us. We will start the dialogue soon in Munich. I am glad that we are going through this period during Polish presidency. And this is a good moment to set common priorities. We have always understood Americans well, and Americans often protected our interests, because this is what the community is about. Welfare is not only created on trade. Polish Prime Minister said, "We will not panic, we will prepare for possible trade war." So I think it is important to listen to Donald Tusk. But we also have to think about predictability, about dialogue, about understanding common values, because there are things we cannot compromise on. I am a former president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and I understand the importance of values, common values. We are also the biggest trade and investment partnership. Together, we stand for almost 30% of global services and 40% of global GDP. We are ready for cooperation. We want strategic partnership, but also dialogue and trust, because it is the only way to reach strategic goals.
The next speaker is Mr. Shahim for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When the US hesitates, China accelerates. We learned it before, Madam Speaker. When Trump pulled out the Paris Agreement in 2017, he allowed China to become a global leader in sustainable technology. Today, it's the world's top producer of renewable energy. Their economy is booming, and more than 40% of their economic growth comes directly from their solar panels, their windmills, their heat pumps, and their electric vehicles. Just as the US is in a position to take the lead in the green economy, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, Trump does China again a favor. He tries to stop record-breaking green growth in the US and to look for old sources of energy for the old technology. While we hear oil, fracking and tariffs, China focuses on solar, batteries and EVs. That should say enough. The US was just on time for their green transition, but Trump will make America late again.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Knotek for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Every reasonable person is able to adjust its goals and strategies. The world has changed, but not the EU energy and climate policy. Goal was EU prosperity, worldwide follow-up and global emissions reductions. But we see the opposite. EU economy is struggling and global emissions are growing. Green Deal, at least its climate part, is dead. If we insist on its implementation, we will fail to protect Europeans from climate change effects and the Europeans' ability to adapt to climate change. After the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, global reality and more information and understanding of the mechanism of climate change, it is clear that we are entering a new post-Paris Agreement era, which for Europe means speed of emissions reductions and therefore ETS price must correspond to US and China. No coal power plant shut down until having stable and reliable effective replacement. Renewables and nuclear must be placed exact on equal footing. Invest in the fusion development massively. And of course, get rid of ESG, climate law, taxonomy, and etc. And of course, Madam Commissioner, please do it now. And now to the WHO. Europe is still part of WHO, or maybe we shall change this. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Vondra for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair. We must be interested in the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement for one reason only, to reflect our own course. Let me tell you, the one which we take is not the right one. The radical decarbonization is not a religion we must adhere to at any cost. It makes no economic sense to continue in this path alone. China does not care about our approach, just to its own advantage. India, Turkey are the same. The US has made a huge U-turn. Argentina, Indonesia, most likely follow. The EU must undertake a painful self-assessment and admit that we are on the wrong track. The Green Deal needs a deep reform. It is not a growth strategy. It is costly, self-inflicted policy resulting in economic poverty and mistrust in the politics. Hopefully with Omnibus, the Commission has begun taking steps in the right direction. So let's energize ourselves to use this as an opportunity and to do much more.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Andrews for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner and colleagues. The decision to suspend USAID is consistent with the public policy vandalism that has characterized the beginning of the Trump administration and applauded by autocrats around the world. And it is Afghan women, it is Ukrainian soldiers, it is hungry people in DRC, in Sudan, in Yemen that will suffer. But before we get on our high horse, let us not forget that EU development policy is going in the same direction, albeit without the scorched earth approach of the United States. So what we need now, in the short term, we need agencies to be provided with information about the waivers that are available from the State Department. We need to use every part of our diplomatic capacity to do that. In the medium term, we also have to bring forward contractual payments in order to assist with the cash flow and liquidity problems that agencies are experiencing during this 90-day suspension. And finally, we need a clear statement from the President of the Commission, Madame von der Leyen, a restatement of the EU's commitment and solidarity to our developing world partners, and we also need to make a clear statement that we will not surrender the soft power that we have built up over decades and not surrender that to autocrats. So far, the silence is deafening. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Bloos for 1.5 minutes, please.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin, Frau Kommissarin. Sehr geehrte
Thank you, President. Colleagues, some people don't seem to have been aware of the fact that Monday was a very important deadline. According to the Paris Agreement, the European Union should have submitted its NDCs, and it didn't do that. The European Union failed to do this. Now, it's maybe not the worst crime, but in order to retain our credibility, we do need to comply with these rules, and we need to follow them at all times. So, Ms. von der Leyen, the Green Deal is fine, but you really do need also to show the European Union that you are committed to complying with and upholding the international community's rules. After all, we have to comply with and live by the rules so that others follow suit, so that we lead by example. We debate climate crisis, floods, forest fires and so forth every single month, and yet the fossil fuel companies are raking in the profits at the cost of people who lose every single bit of their livelihood and their homes. This is the most woeful injustice which must be brought to an absolutely immediate end. Those who pollute have got to be held to account. At the most recent climate conference, Europe and Germany committed $1 million to climate action. Now, could we please agree that climate destruction cannot generate profit. Anyone who pollutes has got to pay. That is a principle which has got to be implemented now. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Sjöstedt. For 1 minute, please.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, President. Trump's politics remind me of the bullies in the schoolyard. His policies help the rich and are bad for the poor. Just like in the schoolyard, I think that we need to respond with solidarity, and we need to step up and defend what is correct. We need to continue defending international law, and we need to reduce our own emissions and to strengthen international cooperation in this matter. We also need to give a reply to the tariffs and provocations of Mr. Trump, and we can do so by placing tariffs on what is most detrimental to the environment. And this way we will deal with those who are not committed to the future of the planet.
1 minute, please.
Thank you. Paris Climate Agreement. Afuera! We need to end the man-made climate change hoax. USAID. Afuera! A government agency that fraudulently wastes taxpayers' money, engages in money laundering, and acts as a CIA front to manipulate public opinion abroad to effect regime change must be taken down. USAID has even indirectly funded the Wuhan lab from where the Chinese virus was leaked, which then ushered in the COVID totalitarianism. WHO, afuera! These people are fed up with these unelected bureaucrats of this lobby organization for Big Pharma, who are unaccountable to no one, except maybe to their Chinese donors. President Trump is showing us the way. And unless we want to go down in history as complete idiots, we should follow his lead. Green Deal, development aid, WHO, take it all down and give us Doge instead, so we can fight these despicable globalitarian misanthropists. Thank you.
I have now opened the blue card option in case you want to use that. And the next speaker is Mr. Peter Liese for 1.5 minutes, please.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
President, colleagues, the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is nothing short of a catastrophe. And I genuinely fear that this is going to mean that we cannot stick to 1.5 in the longer term. But this does not mean for me that we should give up the fight. Every 0.1 degree that we can prevent is very important, and the Paris Agreement is focused on under 2 degrees and as close to 1.5 as possible. I think well below 2 degrees is still feasible. Let me remind you that under Trump 1, the EU decided on climate neutrality, and many states the world over have in the interim followed suit. So we mustn't give up. On the contrary, but we must become even better. We've got to scale down bureaucracy, we've got to focus on technology neutrality, and we've got to ensure that we protect the climate hand in hand with the people, not at their expense, with the economy and not at the expense of entrepreneurs and enterprise. So this means less bureaucracy, but it certainly means climate action hand in hand with the vast majority of countries the world over who are committed with us to this goal. Thank you.
There's Mr. Bullmann for 1 minute, please.
Frau Präsidentin.
President, Commissioner, honourable members. Punitive tariffs levied on allies, undermining the development agenda, withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the announcements that they would not honour commitments to the World Bank and other international funds. This is not Washington as we know it. It harks back to Neanderthal days, uncivilized. It is clear to me that the US after Trump will be weaker, more isolated, and with fewer friends. Those that will reap the rewards are in China. What does this mean for the EU? We need to strengthen cooperation with those countries that do wish to work with us in Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere. They are waiting to see a stronger commitment on the part of the EU. That will help us to ensure more sustainability and more solidarity in our world today. Thank you.
And there is a blue card. Do you want to take it? Oh, okay. We will continue with the next speaker. It is Mr. Tanja Correa for 1 minute, please.
President, Commissioner, the United States have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. They have suspended humanitarian aid, and they've left the WHO. Catastrophe. But the reasons why the United States did all of this are very simple. When it comes to humanitarian aid, I'll say one thing. It's too dirty for the USAID. And then the climate agreement seems to be, the Paris Agreement seems to be a religion. Everybody has to agree with the Paris Agreement. And then what happens? Europe is in the state it is. We are underdeveloped. As for the World Health Organization, that fantastic organization that creates pandemics and wants to create a health passport to control populations, well, it's very clear. You have to withdraw. You can't stay somewhere that is totalitarian and does not respect citizens and does not respect their rights. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Zalewska for 1 minute, please.
Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner, are you receiving the happiness pill at the European Commission in order to create a reality that is simply not there? In Baku, we were not only talking about Draghi report, we were speaking about how unfortunate are the consequences of Green Deal, the Green Deal that has not been planned well, that has not been calculated. And then we also heard that European Union will not be followed because it's not just the United States. China, India, Brazil said there is no money for green transition, for Green Deal. People were clear about it. So European Union and the institutions which have been receiving money from around the world are not able to account for their expenditures, and they are not able to demonstrate the effects of their actions. It's quite clear, it is quite obvious from the last report from the European Court of Auditors. It's time to wake up. Thank you.
Tabana for 1 minute, please.
History tells us Truman created the Marshall Plan. But I say Truman's true genius was swallowing his pride and reaching out to Herbert Hoover. Yes, Hoover, the most reviled former president in those days. Why? Because they understood a strong Europe meant a strong America. They crossed party lines and prevented millions starving. Hoover, that hated man, convinced his isolationist Republican Party to support the plan. Where is that spirit today? Republicans are just as isolationist now. But where is their Hoover? Where is a Truman or Eisenhower style leadership in White House? Now is our turn. We were saved by visionaries. Now we must be those visionaries. Millions face famine, disease, or threats to democracy today, I demand the European Commission immediately present to this Parliament a plan to fill the void left by America's retreat from international cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Marino for 1 minute, please.
Il ritiro degli USA dall'accordo di Parigi sul
The US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and the WHO and the suspension of humanitarian aid constitute an unprecedented threat to international cooperation and indeed to global stability. The US are responsible for some 13% of CO2 emissions, second only to China, and their withdrawal from the Paris Agreement places a serious threat on global attempts to reduce the global temperature. They contribute 18% to the WHO's budget, and which finances extremely important HIV, tuberculosis and malaria programs. I've heard mention of health passports. Now, viruses and bacteria, I can tell you as a medic myself, don't need passports. They transcend borders everywhere, and it's always the poorest and the most vulnerable who suffer the most. So this is just a classic egotism. The European Union, therefore, has to step up to the plate and has to enhance and expand its internationalism in order to build a future which is both healthy and prosperous for all. Thank you.
Sarah Sanchez for 1 minute, please.
Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, WHO, and cut funding to USAID. What is he saying? The world can rot. The poor can die. He's a government of rich techno bros who are here to take over, and goodbye to humanitarian aid and public health and climate aid. And what he's saying is just hate your neighbor. Forget who's exploiting you. Here's $1,000 to turn in your immigrant neighbor. Or you can simply say that women are inferior or Palestinians are animals. Trump is the most savage capitalism that exists. But what is the EU saying right now? Well, they're going down the right path. They're defending large corporations and kowtowing to U.S. imperialism. 15 months financing genocide against Palestine and adding to warmongering and being in bed with Meloni's extreme right.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Sell for 1 minute, please.
$20 million.
$20 million to film in Iraq, millions for condoms in one country, Guatemala, other money wasted. Over 40 billion is wasted on such nonsense projects each year in the US under John Biden. Donald Trump has put an end to this. US first means US taxpayers' money is used to further US citizens' interests. We are falling far too far behind. We waste far too much money. The German government wastes billions each year, 32 billion on development aid. Tax contributions from 20,000 Germans. 20,000 Germans work alone to finance these projects. And what about the money for development climate projects in Nigeria? 10 million for driver's licenses for transgender rickshaw drivers in India. Trump will put an end to this nonsense in Germany. We will certainly do that. You can count on us.
The next speaker is Mr. Dostal for 1 minute, please.
Dámy a pánové, dnešní téma nám připomíná, že od mezi...
Thank you, President. We realize, we're reminded today that it is possible to withdraw from international organizations and that this can have a very major impact. 30 years ago in my region, we saw protests in the people taking to the streets, but nobody would ever take to the streets to protest against the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. The WHO used to be a good organization. It actually tackled all kinds of serious diseases, and nobody would ever have thought of withdrawing. Even Trump wouldn't have done, and his electorate would have prevented from doing it. But COVID showed how it was absolutely failing. My experience in the healthcare sector doesn't surprise me that people are reacting as they are. In the European Union, I think we are simply a transactional union based on treaties and conventions. I think we really have got to realize that we need to take...
Poštovana potpredsjednice.
Vice President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, the main fundamentals of public health were defined by Andreas Stamper. He gave a huge contribution to the founding of the WHO. He was aware that health threats go over the state borders and that working together we can better secure the health of our citizens. Multilateral cooperation is important for fighting cross-border health threats. This is why we were carefully following US's withdrawal from the WHO. The organizational aspects of cooperation, of its work and improving its work are topics that we can debate. But when it comes to the fight against the spread of the disease and the protection of the citizens, we must stand united. This is why I'd like to invite our partners to give us a detailed explanation about their positions regarding the WHO, how they see the improvement of its work, so that we can continue our multilateral organization within this special organization of the UN. When it comes to dismantling the USAID, this is not good if it would mean the end of the humanitarian assistance by the US to poor countries that need it. On the other hand, when it comes to the promotion of a single agenda by this organization, this is very concerning. Any use of humanitarian aid to manipulate the public space should be condemned so that it is not repeated.
Andrukaitis, 1 minute, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner. Of course, United States withdrawal from Paris Climate Agreement and WHO and suspension of US humanitarian aid is shameful and irresponsible decision. WHO plays a crucial role in protecting health and security of the world's people, including all of us, including Americans, by addressing the root causes of disease, building stronger health systems, and detecting, preventing, and responding to health emergencies, including disease outbreaks, often in dangerous places where others cannot do. I was in Ebola crisis. I know what does it mean. Pandemics and epidemics. I am a medical doctor. The United States was a founding member of WHO in 1948 and has participated in shaping and governing WHO work ever since. And for over 7 decades, WHO and US have saved countless lives and protecting Americans and all people from health threats. And today's Trump decision is shameful, and MAGA we will call MASA, Make America Small Again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Annemans for 1 minute, please.
Collega's.
Honourable members, we're not going to organise a debate every month and spend hours bemoaning each and every action taken by the US under Trump to herald in a new era. We would be better advised to channel our energy into welcoming this new era, because the age of multilateralism, moral superiority of international organisations, the age of international interference and endless subsidies, manipulation through the Soros network, that age is done. The age of the left-wing globalists is done, undermining national identity in the nation state. Identity and freedom will now become the driving force for industrial and technological growth. The days of the current majority in the European Parliament are numbered, should be numbered. We need to prevent the current shaky majority here in this European Parliament dooming Europe to obscurity and impoverishing us all through the cult of the Migration Pact and the Green Deal.
Next speaker is Mr. Toselli for 1 minute, please.
Se vogliamo discutere delle scelte.
If we want to debate Donald Trump's choices when it comes to climate, health, and humanitarian aid, first of all, we should say, do we have the necessary arguments to counterattack the U.S. president's decisions? The Paris Agreement. If we look at our own house, we can only see that some of the rules that were agreed in this very house have led to subsidies that have caused damage. WHO. We have not talked about the links between the EU and pharmaceutical companies during COVID. Suspension of humanitarian aid. The world has forgotten all about the financial irregularities that the EU Agency for Asylum Claims has been charged with. So these are not choices that can solve all problems. But if we want to be credible as an EU, we need to be transparent, functional, and we should not be perceived as hostile by our citizens.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Goerens for 1 minute, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. Children who are starving, women who have been assaulted, even raped. All of this is because of cuts to the USAID system. And this is due to the actions of one person who is loudly applauded from the sidelines by his algorithm wizard. The Americans are our brothers, our cousins, but they're not our guardians. Too many places you may see vulnerable people who have no access even to the very basic essentials for life, for reproductive health. To see this is to look suffering, even death, right in the eyes. What is the role of the EU in a situation such as this? We can't replace US aid, no. But although we can't make good everything, we can do a lot more and we can do a lot better. If we improve our diplomacy, if we have greater imagination and we put more budgetary funding on the line, we can do more. We have money in our own budgets. We have for development assistance. We have humanitarian assistance. In addition, we can do a lot more, and we will have to do a lot more, though, to step into the breach and fulfill the gaps left by Washington.
Honestly, dear colleagues, I'm sick and tired of discussing old white men destroying our future. In times where nature catastrophes, wildfires and droughts destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people, still denying the climate crisis is just irresponsible and not forgivable. Young people all around the world rightfully demanded a livable future, and we do that right now. Today, I stand here and I demand from the European Union, we cannot give up this fight. The Paris Agreement is an obligation, and it's our responsibility. Ursula von der Leyen said we owe it to our children, and therefore we need to stick to the Green Deal, we need to phase out fossil fuels and decrease the emissions at least 90% in 2040. We need to keep our promises. This is something we owe our children today and every day, and we should have these debates in this House thinking about what's at stake right now, looking at the floods and the pictures, not just when it happens, but always. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Botenga for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. I'm a bit surprised no one mentions here that the United States have also withdrawn from the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. This makes the world, for all Europeans, a more dangerous place. I'm not surprised, of course. I mean, we're speaking in the end of a country whose governments have illegally abducted people, tortured them in secret prisons throughout the Middle East, killed children, bombed weddings from Iraq to Afghanistan, a country responsible, according to its own universities, for millions of victims in the Middle East. We're speaking about a government that's actually today, currently pushing, supporting genocide, supporting the deportation of millions of Palestinians, the country blocking the Cuban people from getting the medical equipment they need and deserve, a country imposing sanctions on working-class families throughout the world just because they disagree with their government, and a country currently mass deporting working-class families from the United States. Now, the question is not, why are the US withdrawing from human rights conventions? The question is, why is Europe not reacting? Do we think this is a good thing? Are we afraid to stand up? Or is this the true face of this union, not fighting for global human rights, but for corporate interests and profits of Musk? Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Arndt for 1 minute, please.
Donald Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. We should all be celebrating this. He's brought to an end these delusions and fantasies adduced as a justification for plundering our wallets and restricting our freedoms. These delusions claim that if the global temperature rises more than 1.5 degrees, this will endanger humanity. But this has already happened last year and nothing happened. It also says that humans are responsible for generating CO2 emissions. This has also been disproved. People can't just decide what ideal temperature they want on this planet, and moreover, in 2021 the average temperature was 10.5 degrees. In India, which is the most populous country, it was 25 degrees. How can it be that the Indians can live with an average temperature 15 degrees above the average in Germany perfectly well? They can not only survive, they can live perfectly well. Therefore, stop driving our citizens into poverty and stop eliciting such fear. End the Paris Agreement.
Ms. Arndt, there is a blue card. Do you want to take it? There's a blue card. Okay. The next speaker will be Mr. McAllister. Mr. McAllister for 1.5 minutes, please.
Madam President, dear Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the American retreat from international institutions and agreements was in many ways a move to be expected from President Trump. These reckless decisions have far-reaching risks and repercussions. Specifically, I want to shine a spotlight on just one of the most devastating impacts which hasn't been mentioned yet this evening: the suspension of US humanitarian aid and its dire consequences for global demining efforts. At this very moment, 58 countries are contaminated by landmines. 28 are grappling with the traces of cluster munitions. These devices cripple and kill, particularly in active conflict zones like Ukraine. Just yesterday, we heard the speaker of the Verkhovna Rada outline the dire needs of his country. In 2023, the United States contributed nearly $310 million to mine action, making up 39% of global support. Without American funding, life-saving demining operations are grinding to a halt. In return, the delivery of humanitarian aid is obstructed, economic development hindered, and post-conflict reconstruction delayed. While the European Union cannot fill the gap left by the US alone, let us take a leading role. Every EU member state is a party to the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. We have already pledged millions of euros for mine clearance, but we need to ensure this commitment is reflected also in the next multi-annual financial framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Wölken for 1 minute, please.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, vielen Dank.
President, thank you. Commissioner, thank you for being here. The richest person in the world is taking away any protection and support from the very poorest and most vulnerable people the world over. This is absolutely shocking. The AfD and others on the right of this House are celebrating because they value human life as nothing. They're only interested in power and in commercial interests. They're not interested in or concerned by individuals or people, and that's why they're fans of Donald Trump. At the same time, the US has withdrawn again from the Paris Climate Agreement, and I have to say I'm optimistic that this will actually bring the rest of the world together to stand up against him, because it is a fact that wind energy is actually cheaper than all the alternatives. If Donald Trump could understand anything, little as he does normally seem to pick up, he could surely understand the economic argument that wind energy is cheaper, and surely understand that we are going to give our industry certainty and security with permitting and planning, and our citizens the same certainty and security. Thank you.
Mr. Sell, seat 612. Remember, blue card is 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Falcon, for accepting my question. Mr. Bowman, your colleague, described the US president as a Neanderthal. I do wonder, when you use that language, who do you want to cooperate? Putin is a criminal, Xi Jinping, Milei, they're all criminals. Trump is a criminal himself. Orban is bad, Le Pen, Meloni, all evil. So who on earth do you want to cooperate with? You're isolated. No one is going along with your policies around the globe.
Das Schöne ist, ich bin ja...
Thank you. The thing is, I'm always in favour of a frank exchange. I wanted to ask Ms. Arndt a question because she comes from Friesland, as I do, and we're very much under threat because of rising sea level. So I wanted to ask her what she thought about that, if she was just denying it. But unfortunately, she wouldn't take a question. But there are hundreds of thousands of people in our area who are victims of climate change, and there will be more. It's a very serious issue. Let me say the majority of people in Europe, the majority of people in Germany vote for democracy. They don't vote for the extreme right, and therefore we've got myriad people and partners with whom we can work together. We don't need to count on races. We don't need to be supported by extreme right. Thank you.
Just for 1 minute, please. 1.5 minutes, please.
At 78 years of age, Donald Trump has managed to anger the European Commission and many states in Europe. But he really is a contrast to the immobilism we see here, because action, reaction, he's already signed dozens of decrees that will change the real lives of Americans and increase the competitiveness of the United States. Every dollar spent is analyzed, and if it's misspent, then it's stopped. No taboos, no delays. We speak here about human rights which never have any impact. We add further rules on our citizens. We don't control how EU funds are used. We just keep adding more debt. Are you serious? Is this the European Parliament? By saying America first, Donald Trump is defending American rights, and as an American, he's correct. What bothers me is not that he's defending American rights, is that Europeans have for a while been unable to defend European rights. And I ask on all of you to do away with the Green Deal, which penalizes industry, farmers, and the purchasing power of our citizens. The ECR has listened to us, and we thank them. Are we actually looking at the real economy? Do you want to be with the left wing, which wears a keffiyeh? Join us in putting an end to the Green Deal. Be on the right page of history, and let's not be like, let's not sit idly by as the big powers pass us by.
Please.
Madame la Présidente.
President, Commissioner, honourable members, 22.6 million euro. That is the total amount of development aid spent by the European Union in 2024 in China. Our money is financing the destruction of our economy, our industry. 1.6 billion from European taxpayers' money will go to sub-Saharan Africa in 2024-2025. That won't stem the flow of migration. We, European citizens, are financing this development aid, and it does not benefit us. The US has suspended development aid, and this begs a question for the European Union. Are our programmes relevant? Same question for the WHO. It is driven by ideology, setting standards on education, sex education. Same goes for its approach to the pandemic, which undermines sovereignty and individual freedom. The US decision reminds us of our duty to face up to our own responsibilities as Europeans rather than trying to solve the problems of the entire world.
And the next speaker is Ms. Siet Friis, 1 minute. Donald Trump has pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement, so the next 4 years we will be looking for the Americans, but we won't see them at international conferences. It's a huge problem that we will no longer see them around the negotiating table. When women and children need medical help, they can't expect help from the US because the US has turned its back on the WHO. And humanitarian crises that are exacerbating every day, well, the US won't have their back. USAID has closed its payouts. This is not solidarity, and it's very worrying. We need to work together, but now we cannot consider the US anymore. But we need to remember the EU. We need to stand together in the EU and show leadership for the environment and for security. Thank you very much.
1 minute, please.
Madam President, leaving the Paris Agreement, the WHO, and closing down the world's biggest aid organization from one day to another. What kind of world does Donald Trump really want? Is it a planet in climate disarray with firestorms, floodings, and hurricanes where people die, where homes are destroyed? A world where we lose the fight against malaria, HIV, cholera, where children die in diseases we should have eradicated? A world where girls die giving birth to babies they never chose to have, where more pandemics paralyze our societies. What we're now seeing is nothing else but a frontal attack against global cooperation, our planet, and our shared humanity. The Trump presidency has only begun. We already can see that the attack on the rules-based world order is creating global insecurity and costing the poorest their lives. We, the EU, now need to show leadership more than ever. We are now the hope for the world's poorest, for everyone believing in democracy and solidarity, and it's our moral obligation to live up to their expectations. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole. Prego onorevole Martins.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Martin.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, President. Trump, as is the case for the extreme right, hates life and hates the people. Only the rich will be saved and everybody else doesn't matter. The WHO protects human life, and abandoning it is a policy of cruelty. It expects that people can just die because they have no access to medicine or they're exposed to climate disasters. This is a conspirationist point of view that has too many allies in Europe. They aim to control women in a policy of death. Combating them, Commissioner, is our biggest responsibility. How can we face the US or China? By fighting against authoritarianism, fascism, and being at the forefront of defending the climate and poor people. What we do now will have an impact for years to come. Thank you.
Onorevole, is there a blue card for you if you accept? Ok, prego l'onorevole Jovanovic per 30 secondi.
Zivanovic for 30 seconds.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you. I think you don't realize the accusations you're throwing around. The WHO is an organized criminal group and has committed crimes against humanity. This has been proven during the pandemic when the WHO made us wear masks that didn't defend us from anything and made us get vaccines that killed people and made Ursula rich. How can you accuse Trump when what Trump is doing is simply punishing the WHO for killing people? It is unacceptable doing this. You are violating the Convention of Oviedo regarding patients' rights.
30 secondi.
You have 30 seconds for an answer.
Deputada, percebo que de
Colleague, I see that whoever likes conspiracies just likes conspiracies. When children die with preventable disease because negationists are against vaccines, this is a policy of death. When in Brazil there was not enough oxygen for patients who had COVID and there was no access to vaccines, that is a policy of death. The extreme right has hundreds of thousands of dead people at your feet, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Prego, onorevole Stanoia.
Thank you. Mr. Stoyanov.
Благодаря, госпожо председател.
Thank you very much. The decision of the US to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement is in line with the national sovereignty. The WHO failed to protect us from the pandemic. Only Bulgaria spent 85 billion euro for vaccines. And at the same time, people were affected, their livelihoods were affected, devastated. We have unrealistic regulations. The countries from Asia and Africa enlarge their capacities. The Paris Climate Agreement made people in Europe poorer. We should defend our national interests well. We have to keep our eyes open for the problems, for the climate crisis, but we have to place our citizens at the heart of our action.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker, Mr. Kanev.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, dear colleagues. I think we need to be honest. Without the participation of the USA, the Paris Climate Agreement is not achievable. Its goals are not achievable. We all know that. We also know that without international cooperation, our climate goals for 2050 are in doubt, to say the least. And we need to include that awareness in amendments to our climate legislation. Does that mean we need to give up on decarbonization in general? No, because we import fossil fuels. So for us, decarbonization is a matter of independence. We have strong positions in environmentally friendly technologies, and we shouldn't give those away to China. We need to take back what the U.S. Took away from us with their anti-inflation bill. Now is the time for stimulus and encouragement of business.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Zingaretti. Thank you very much, Madam President. Many institutions have been changed, and many of them will no doubt would benefit from improvement and restructuring. But really, this is a law of the jungle that's being implemented. Scant regard for justice. The Criminal Court, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, these are institutions that are meant to create prosperity and protect people's rights. In the wake of COVID, hundreds of thousands of people realize that their lives were saved by policies of the WHO. And we need to realize there are many other diseases which are a threat to millions of people. Trump is wrong. He should not be withdrawing from these international institutions. This democratic forum is absolutely vital for us, and we will continue to say the truth, which is that Europe standing together has guaranteed peace and freedom, and it stood up against nationalism and the extreme right. You can stand with the oligarchs if that's your choice. We will stand for the individual people. Thank you.
Prego, onorevole Girauta Vidal.
Thank you. Mr. Girauta Vidal is the next speaker.
Thank you, President. 1 minute doesn't give me enough time to present an argument, but I would advise you to read a Nobel Prize-winning book, The Great Escape. The third part is dedicated to development aid. It is an excellent demonstration of someone who does not hail from the right, but has shown that development aid is counterproductive. The conditions attached to aid in the countries being assisted is not helpful. Really, if you have growth, the development comes about of itself. We need to look at USAID funds and where they were going. I would commend Trump for withdrawing or for suspending these supposed development funds and for withdrawing the US from the Paris Climate Agreement and the WHO. Thank you.
Prego, onorevole Berlato.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Berlato.
Signora Presidente.
President, Commissioner, President Donald Trump has withdrawn the United States of America from the Paris Agreement, and which aims to contain global warming below 2 degrees Celsius below pre-industrial levels, with the ambitious goal of reaching climate neutrality by the middle of this century. Probably the President of the United States of America also agrees with the fact that this fantasy that has never been proven that says that climate warming is caused by man-made emissions is just a very expensive fairy tale. What he has done is the triumph of common sense over these fantastious ideas, and this will truly be better for the ecosystem.
Cartellino blu per lei.
Thank you. Are you prepared to take a blue card, sir? On
it. Dear colleague, I must say I accept some of your positions, but I have a very concrete question. Are we in the same position regarding the Paris Agreement as is the US? Can we do the drill, baby, drill policy in Europe, and Italy having a right to far-right government and having some gas deposits, by the way? Have you started exploiting these gas deposits or no? And if not, why not?
Egregio collega, io ho espresso il mio punto.
Honorable colleague, I agree with much of what President Trump said the day of his inauguration, and I stressed the ideas that I agree with, such as abandoning the Paris Agreement, such as withdrawing from the WHO. During the health crisis linked to COVID-19, this organization showed that it was unable to cope. And this has also been shown when it comes to the abandoning of the Green Deal. I stressed what I agree with about what President Trump says. I can't say about everything that he has said.
Grazie, onorevole. Prego, onorevole.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Mr. Fisik.
Trumpova politika má mnohé prvky.
Thank you. Trump's current policies bear all the hallmarks of far-right populism. They are divisive. Just think of the unelected Elon Musk, to whom Trump has granted almost unlimited power over the state system. This is a threat to the democratic establishment and, of course, will be resisted and ultimately fail sooner or later. For the EU, this is an opportunity, a necessity to take the initiative once again. If we are to withstand the pressure from the US and also from an authoritarian Russia, we need to create a robust, vital and competitive economic framework that will ease us of a reliance on unreliable partners, enable us to cope with the looming crisis that makes sense economically, environmentally, geopolitically. There is no time to waste, no time for backward-looking revisionism, and certainly not following the pattern of Trump, Putin or Musk.
The time is now for EU to step up and show global leadership. We have been in this situation before. Last time that man took office in the US, his first act was to undermine global cooperation in the field of climate change. And today it's the same. It's all about drill, baby, drill, instead of actual actions. We hear from the far right today that there's no money for green transition. And that in a year where we have seen droughts, floods, fires. Wake up. This is reality. The time is now for us to step up together with everybody who is willing to do the same. It's no time for backtracking, and it should go without saying that when US said they're out, we are more than in. We need to step up our support for climate action also in the vulnerable and poor country. This is about climate justice, and it's our responsibility. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole. Prego.
Thank you. Mr. Parmigiano is the next speaker.
Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Every day we hear more announcements from the US, tearing to shreds years of constructive work amongst not only the US society, but global community, and destruction of resources as well. Withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and from the WHO are choices which threaten millions of lives, literally. We are faced with some serious challenges, the climate change challenge and many health problems the world over. The response should be greater solidarity rather than less. And yet we see nothing but egotism and political egotism too in his decisions. Yet, for the European Union, this paves the way to an era of opportunity. We can respond firmly and robustly. We can strengthen our own environmental commitments. We can contribute more to the WHO, and we can do more to step into the breach to help those who are vulnerable, particularly as a result of what Trump has done. We can show that we are credible leaders in the environment and in public health. Thank you.
Mazurek.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Mazurek.
Zbytočne, pretože na konci...
You are wasting your time wailing here. You will ultimately lose here.
Again, please.
Okay. Plačete tu na...
You are wailing out loud here, but ultimately you will lose out. This is a waste of time. People are waking up and jettisoning their pointless climate goals. Ultimately, with such goals, average people will not be able to buy anything, a house, a car. It will undermine our living standards. I applaud Donald Trump for taking the US out of these criminal organizations like the WHO. They are all at the behest of Bill Gates. They're looking to rob people of their rights and enrich pharma companies. Donald Trump has withdrawn the US from the WHO. I'm a citizen who loves freedom. I would like to see our governments show such courage and withdraw such criminal organizations and get rid of pointless climate goals. After the next elections, you will lose.
choosing one's interest over one's principles is a betrayal to history and not just to one's character. The European project, as expensive as it may, as difficult as it may be for some of us in this room, is more necessary and more urgent than ever. What can we reply? The U.S. has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, so we must show greater commitment to our green transition. We need to decarbonize in order to grow. Exiting the WHO, we need to focus on what we managed to do to overcome a pandemic together. We need to save lives and beat HIV and other diseases. Humanitarian aid should, instead of opening the doors to countries such as China to fill in the void, with less United States in the world, then we need more Europe in the world. Donald Trump might fail the world, but Europe will not fail history.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Temido.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues, the world, as we've known over the past few decades, has changed. America first shows hostility over the multilateral system. The withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement for the second time will be detrimental to climate emissions, and abandoning the WHO will throw off coordination of international aid to 300,000 people over the world, because nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And finally, doing away with the USAID will lead to greater poverty, food insecurity, and stability, with waves of migrants and refugees. The U.S. withdrawal from the multilateral system will shake the geopolitical system and will strengthen actors such as China and Russia. EU institutions and its member states in this context have a historic responsibility to take up leadership of resistance and the defense of an alternative world committed to global health, multilateralism, sustainable development, and with people, because that is why we're here.
Honorable Temido, is there a blue card?
Thank you very much.
If you want, if you accept. Yes. Okay. Please, Mr. Oliveira, for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Ms. Temido, I have a very direct question. Did I understand correctly that if we step away from Donald Trump's decisions, this also means that that EU has to take up all of these ideas? For example, when it comes to climate, this changes the productive paradigm. And we also need to look at the social aspects. And when it comes to the WHO, do you mean that multilateralism should also be done by the EU in order to resolve such an important topic which was so ignored during COVID?
Risposta.
Obrigada.
You have 30 seconds. Thank you. I think that what the EU should do, well, this evening we've heard in this House that I hope these are not the voices that win out. I hope that what wins out is respect for others, respect for human life, respect for the international order, because that is why we turn to politics, not to make America first, not to make ourselves first. And that is what our citizens are expecting from the EU, and the only real reason worth fighting for.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Ehlers.
Dank u wel, voorzitter, commissaris, collega's. De reorganisatie van de Amerikaanse overheid door...
Thank you very much. The reorganization of the American administration by President Trump and Elon Musk is nothing but a nightmare for left liberal elites here. Finally, they're slashing one of their pet projects, USAID. But there are plenty citizens here in Europe who are living a waking nightmare because they can't make ends meet on a weekly or daily basis by the failed policies of the EU administration, for which they're having to foot the bill. Development aid is one of your worst hobby projects, because what happens is the taxes of the poor people in the rich countries go to line the pockets of the rich in the poor countries. We should be embracing with open arms the Musk approach. We should be replicating it in Brussels to stop the squandering of tens of thousands of billions of euros. Trump's policy is far from radical. It's simply good reason and common sense. The Americans are at the top of his priority list, and it's high time we did the same and put our citizens in first place.
Okay, please, Mr. Stefanuta, for 30 seconds.
Ms. Sellers, your group is fighting hard on migration. What do you think will happen to people who are left without means in the North Africa, in the Saharan region, who are left to climate change, to war of water, of resources? Where would they go? Where would they go if we don't help them where they are, if we don't help them develop where they are? Aren't you, by having this argument, by bowing to King Trump, aren't you, in fact, going against your own policies on migration?
Prego, onorevole, for 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very naive argument to think what we're doing in Africa and the rest of the developing world is actually helping them at the moment. We don't see significant improvements because of the project of the EU. We spend billions and billions of dollars buying them blenders for schools where they don't have electricity, funding transgender craziness in developing countries. We are not preventing them from migrating. We are not helping them. It has the opposite effect. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole. Prego, onorevole.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Farantouris.
Sorry, is there a point of order? Yeah, just 1 second, okay. Please, just 1 second. Please,
Thank you, Ms.
Mr.
President.
Sieber.
I'm sorry, because of the shortness of the time, I'm not able to quote the particular rule, but there is one rule, dear colleague, which says that we do not, it's not allowed to impose hate speech in this parliament. And I can tell you, calling transgender people crazy for being what they are is nothing more. So I ask you to not say that again, and I ask you, Ms. President, to stand up against hate speech like that in this parliament, because we represent all the people and not the people that you deem correctly.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Farantouris.
Dear colleagues, for the last 2 months, we are dealing with what the USA will do or is doing. And we are dealing even less with what the European Union should do. The European Union should remain the trustee of international legality. The European Union should stay the trustee and guardian of world health, global health, the protection of the environment and diversity. The European Union should remain the guardian of welfare and of the reduction of social inequalities. And this can happen by revising the treaties with common external policy, common industrial policy, by increasing expenses on social welfare and reduction of social injustice. Yes to common security and no to increasing equipment and armament. This is how we will be leaders again in the world community for these very vital world goods.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, you're next.
Grazie. Voorzitter, commissaris.
President, Commissioner, the US has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. The European Commission wants to reduce CO2 emissions by 90% by 2040. That is ideological crazy. Each year, we would need to spend around 15 billion a year, 10% of our GDP. the reduction in temperature would be 0.00135 degrees. Who will bear the burden? Farmers, citizens and companies. The Green Deal is not really a deal. The green laws, the ban on combustion engines will undermine European competitiveness. It will destroy innovation. Politicians are preaching here to the US government. The government is looking to grow the US economy. The EU is introducing legislation on AI. The US and China is changing the world. The EU is introducing green rules. So we need to do more than cosmetic change. We need fundamental reform. Thank you.
You have a blue card. Please, Mr. Stoltenberg, for 30 seconds. You can change the microphone or the seat if it doesn't work.
Ja.
Okay.
Meneer Smit, dank u wel voor dit.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. You're talking about too much money being spent on climate policy, but who are the people who are actually on the front line suffering from climate policy? It's the farmers. It's they who suffer from failure of crops and from drought. How will you explain to them that you don't want to spend any money on tackling climate change?
We need review. I talked about the amount of money spent on a minor reduction in temperature, an insignificant change in the increase in temperature, and farmers won't notice that.
Thank you, Mr. De Caro. You are next.
Può l'Europa accettare di essere
for Europe to accept to be crushed by oligarchies and autocracies with the idea of being happy vassals? Is this what we want? We need to choose. Do we want to be protected? Do we want to be protagonists? A few days ago, Sergio Mattarella, president of the Italian Republic, said this while speaking at the university in Marseille. We need to ask that today. Do we want to continue being a shy, kowtowing Europe that follows the negationist and suicidal ideas of the President of the United States, and because we and our children will have to pay for this? Or do we want to be the Europe that fights for the future and creates a hegemony based around civil rights, social rights, and environmental rights that we have all shared in the Paris Agreement? Because that agreement shows the commitment the world has taken with upcoming generations, and it gives sense to Europe. We've shown before that the law of the mighty only leads to destruction, so we need to choose. Do we want to die as subjects of a crazy man, or proudly live our Europe and be masters of our own future? Thank you. Mr. Turch, you're next.
Gracias. Bueno, cuánto odio.
Thank you. How much hate speech you're talking about, how much hatred and how much fear of Trump I'm hearing here, I'm picking up on, and all because of what he said he's going to do. He's abandoning the multilateral fora, which socialist globalists and the far left have been advocating for ages. This globalism has created endless agencies promoted by you, and we've seen the WHO, the Paris Climate Agreement, and all this is now fortunately going to disappear from Trump's agenda. He's doing something completely different. He's auditing how much these socialist projects have actually stolen from the ordinary citizens to be channeled to humanitarian aid under the name of some kind of ideological and woke program, which amounts to nothing more than illegal intervention to overthrow conservative governments. Look what happened in Poland. Look what happened to Bolsonaro. So this is what we hear as a version of what is going on in America. But don't listen to Timmermans. He is not an exception in Europe, sadly, with his green religion. We need an end to impunity here too. Make Europe great again.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Ms. Laurent, you're next.
Non, creo. Merci, Madame la Présidente, Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, honourable members. The time has come. We may have had a slight hope that Donald Trump would worry about the global climate crisis, global health, or development. Well, his recent announcements make his resolve crystal clear. All his announcements take us a little further away from international cooperation that we have supported for decades to tackle global crises and to save lives. He sees health crises as not to be managed by WHO. He does not worry about endangering the health and lives of US citizens. And what about suspending international development aid? It will have a severe impact on poor people around the world. Commissioner, what tangible response will the EU deliver to this disastrous development?
Grazie, onorevole. Prego.
Thank you. Mr. Haider, you're next.
The US withdrawal from the climate agreement is a great opportunity for Europe, an opportunity to bring to an end this crazy religion of climate obsession, and time to bring an end to this crazy CO2 pricing, the climate delusions, and these mad policies which are simply escalating our prices. The end to the destructive Green Deal, which is destroying our air, destroying our agriculture, and is a massive burden to our farmers. Finally, we can send a message to these crazy people wanting to improve our climate. They're all Cassandras prophesying the worst. They're completely deluded. These countries only account for some small amount of CO2 emissions. And do you honestly think that any action there is going to make any difference to the actual outlook for the world? So let's give Europe a future, and let us leave this crazy Paris Climate Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pachin. You are next. Multilateralism has entered its worst-case scenario now that Donald Trump is back in the White House. The withdrawal of the U.S. from the global agreements, the WHO, and in research is a lethal blow to peace, pandemics, inequality, and the fight against climate change. And what is worse, dismantling the largest aid organization in the world is terrible for humanity, but it's also bad for the geopolitical goals of the U.S., because this debate is not only about solidarity, it's also about how we guarantee safety and security in the world. And this threat to security is even greater unless Europe replies quickly, strongly, and intelligently. We agree with you, Commissioner, but cutting European aid and the rumors of cutting the external service or cutting off some cooperation aid is going in the wrong direction. Europe needs to be the guarantor for peace, aid, and multilateralism, and this is because we need to be consistent, not only to show solidarity. We need to guarantee the security and future of our citizens, otherwise there will be none. Thank you. Madame Joron, you're next.
In a single day, Donald Trump has made the red tape army in Brussels look ridiculous. An end to punitive green legislation, the WHO and the rest. No taxpayer money to fund the circus, Pfizer, Bill Gates. 5 billion of development aid was spent on disinformation in Kazakhstan, money wasted in Colombia, Peru, sex change operations in Guatemala? Was USAID not set up to provide humanitarian assistance? And what about WHO? How was it supposed to help healthcare? What did it do during COVID? Censor researchers in Geneva? We saw judicial immunity. Why does the WHO talk about assigned sex or gender and transgender intervention for children? In Brussels, at the same time, money is spent funding a Brussels-friendly press. The RTBF, you're familiar with that, Commissioner, it censored Trump's debate. So who are you kidding here, really?
Grazie, onorevole. Prego, onorevole.
Thank you. Ms. Fritzon, you're next.
Fru talman, kommissionen. Ja, att Trump och USA skulle lämna Parisavtalet, det kan inte ha varit någon överraskning.
Trump and the US have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, but that's not any surprise to us. Trump has made many declarations to that effect. Drill, baby, drill is his mantra. That's how he thinks the international community should be approaching the future. He's been dismantling USAID as well. But this is precisely why the EU's got to continue to act and to invest in people and in enterprise, in the green and just transition. But I fear that the European Commission's work programme today is not up to the task. It's not up to Trump to decide what we should be doing. We have got to target the important objectives for the future. The green transition is still possible. We can still choose the right path to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me remind you, the left wing of this House is constantly bemoaning Trump. He was democratically elected on a manifesto. Did you think US voters got it wrong? And Milei is heading up Argentina, has withdrawn it from the disastrous World Health Organization. If you were to be honest in assessing the appalling COVID policies, Europe would withdraw from the WHO. Trump stated that he is withdrawing from the WHO because of woeful mismanagement of the COVID pandemic. Now the WHO is grabbing more power. On the 1st of June 2024, the WHO in Geneva carved out more powers for itself. It wants to set up a national WHO office in each country. Ladies and gentlemen, this plan should be rejected. They started implementing this plan in December. Reject it. Ensure that healthcare policy remains national sovereignty.
Prego, onorevole Biedron.
Thank you, Mr. Biedron. You're next.
The new Trump-Musk administration is making things clear. This is a government by the oligarchs for the oligarchs. And those disastrous decisions on climate, health and development aid will cause immense suffering for billions of people. But this is exactly the moment when the EU has the chance to step up on the global stage. Yes, it is our moral duty to defend our values, to act in line with the treaties. But I hope that the Commission President, the High Representative and the Member States understand that it is also in our self-interest to show leadership on those issues for a number of reasons. First, it is obviously an illusion that we can isolate ourselves from climate disasters, new diseases, and the consequences of humanitarian crises. And secondly, at the time when Europe's image has suffered in the countries of Global South, this moment represents a unique opportunity to prove to our partners that we are the reliable allies. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Ms. Frigo, you are next.
Madame la Présidente, chers...
President, colleagues, wake up. Donald Trump is sending a very clear signal to Europe, and we have to pick up the gauntlet. We have destroyed our automotive industry, our farmers, and all of this for a world ideology that is disconnected from reality. Let's follow Donald Trump's lessons. He's defending Americans. So when are we going to defend Europeans? Wake up. Under the pretext of the Paris Agreement, you imposed deadly restrictions which have destroyed our industries in the so-called way to save our planet, while China ignores these agreements with no consequences. These agreements are simply a trap that Europe has fallen into. It's economic suicide, and the other powers don't intend to play by the rules. Wake up. This is our chance to finally free ourselves from the United States and take our future into our own hands so that we can continue forward.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Nikolic.
Combien de temps on va encore...
For how long are we going to continue with Ms. von der Leyen and her technocrats' hypocrisy? You criticize the Paris Agreement, but on the other hand, you want to increase the fracked gas from the US. Fracking is damaging to the earth. Tens of thousands of high-pressured water and chemicals are injected into the rock in order to get gas. The groundwaters are contaminated. Methane is a byproduct. You couldn't really be doing something worse for the environment. Many countries, quite rightly, have banned fracking or prohibited it for that very reason. So why would we be importing gas from America, which we find too dirty to produce ourselves? Because we want to contribute towards more contamination and pollution by all the transportation of it. It is high time you realised you've already tried to kill our agriculture and kill our industry. There won't be much left in Europe. Is this why you think it's okay to have pollution and import the LPG? Because our economy is going to die off anyway.
Thank you. That's the end of Catch the Eye. Well, we start Catch the Eye now. Mr. Kelly, you're first for 1 minute.
Commissioner, withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. It's not surprising. Indeed, he did so the last time. But there are 2 points I would like to make. Number one, it should encourage us to redouble our efforts to reach our targets and not reduce them, as some say we should do, and also encourage partners around the world to do the same. The second point I want to make is I was at COP around the last time when the US withdrew, and I remember John Kerry made the point then that while Trump would withdraw, that an awful lot of the 50 states in the United States were already on a trajectory to meeting their commitments, and that would not change. I wonder, would the Commission have the same view of that on this particular time? And finally, in relation to WHO, one of the points President Trump made was there was a huge disparity in what the US was contributing, both voluntary and assessed, as opposed to China. And I think he's right. And I think we should use this opportunity to put the focus on China to fill the void until the WHO have the United States back again. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Mais? Ms. Mais, rather.
Pure a minute. Seat 126. Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Together with 60 members of the European Parliament, I wrote a letter to you, Commissioner Lahib, your colleague Sikela and the Polish presidency. The decision of the administration of Trump to freeze billions of development assistance does not only have an impact on vulnerable populations and on aid workers worldwide, it also directly threatens the values that we hold at core here in Europe. But the reform of USAID does not take place in isolation. It is a trend, a global trend, to cut development assistance, and also in the EU and in the member states we see this. A country like the Netherlands is cutting billions of dollars on ODA, and thereby we create fertile ground for authoritarian and destabilizing powers. Therefore, Commissioner, I ask you again to address these issues at the highest level, to make an inventory of the present and potential global impact of the full package of the announced cuts and share that with this Parliament. Urge Member States to follow through on their commitments, such as the 0.7 GDP for ODA, and present concrete steps on how to do this. And finally, increase efforts to bridge the global financing gap on development assistance and to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you. Jungbluth, you're next for a minute.
Wenn wir uns heute die Debatte mal anhören, die wir geführt haben.
Listening to the debate this evening, we can focus on 2 points. We've heard insult after insult targeting Donald Trump, an autocrat, a capitalist monster. The US is harking back to the Neanderthal age. One MEP described Trump as less than cogent. And another point, everyone is bemoaning the decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement or the WHO. Why are we criticising and insulting time and again? Why do you think that Donald Trump would listen to this House? Donald Trump sees the EU as insignificant. Ursula von der Leyen was not even invited to attend his inauguration. Do you think Donald Trump cares whether some preaching moralist here criticizes him? He does not care what you think.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you. Sieper, you're next.
Auf Deutsch bitte. Wissen Sie, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
colleagues, do you know why I prefer to fight with the right than the left? It's because sometimes the left get carried away by their idealism. But when I hear often Europe first, which is at least one thing. But when I hear from the right your mental creativity, and they're not just allies, but they're competitors, and so is the rest of the world. And then I hear again from you examples such as the US economy is 60% bigger than the EU. It has way more coal and gas resources and also the biggest stock exchange. It's economically, technologically, geopolitically and militarily superior. And this is a competition that we can win. So we need to have allies. And I really do wonder whether you understand the whole concept of competition. But it sounds to me often from what you say that really Trump will just be laughing at Europe because we're just the small people.
Grazie onorevole. Prego.
Thank you. Magnac, you're next for 1 minute. Seat 170.
Thank you. The decision of the US on the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and the WHO encourages us to do one thing, to take the responsibility for our own future. The climate change does not wait for us to make political decisions. We have to remain dedicated to the green transition, the decrease of emissions, and the increase of our investments into green technology, but not to the detriment of our industrial development. We have to strengthen our health systems and international cooperation. Europe has shown that it can take a leading position when it comes to international crisis. And although the direction is changing, we have to keep going in the right direction and fight for our values. Thank you.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, the conclusion seems to be very simple. Europe must take responsibility for itself, and we cannot no longer assume that the US will lead. We must strengthen our own resilience, deepen cooperation, and invest in stability on our own terms. For years, I was the part of civil society. Actually, I landed here in the Parliament directly from NGO Free Courts Initiative in Poland, struggling for the rule of law. So I perfectly understand this particular problem with funding cuts for non-governmental organizations, which are an integral part of Western world. And I recently organized a short meeting with NGOs from Poland, and I heard their alarming reports from the ground. And we need to understand and remember, they are not only think tanks. They often operate on the ground, on the front lines, and they provide sensitive areas services. So we need, as Europe, provide them help, because they are true democracy shield for us.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Commissioner Labib, you may conclude the debate. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, honourable members, I thank you for sharing your perspectives, and following the advice given by many of you, I will concentrate my concluding remarks on what the EU can do, should do, and is doing. Actually, the EU has no choice but adapt for the changing world order and to respond to it. We remain, however, committed to our values and objectives, reaching beyond our borders. And yes, we will continue to stand up for multilateral cooperation and work with partners to this end. We will continue to lead on climate and on global health security for all. And as Commissioner responsible for humanitarian aid, I can assure you the EU will continue its strong humanitarian action for two simple and important reasons. It is who we are, and it is in our own interests as well. We hope that the US also, in their own interests, will return to the Paris Climate Agreement and to WHO, and we will advocate for it. We are already on it. Now, as regards the US foreign aid suspension, we will not speculate on what the US review will finally entail, and we will analyze the full potential impact once the conclusions of the review are known. Once again, at a time of global crisis and uncertainties, we need to strengthen the multilateral system and foster cooperation and solidarity among actions and nations to build a healthier, safer, and more equitable world for all. I thank you again for this rich exchange. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Commissario. La discussione è chiusa.
So, we've closed the list, and the agenda is now honoring the memory of Jan Kuciak and Martina Kuznirova, advancing media freedom, strengthening the rule of law, and protecting journalists across the EU.
Do quindi il benvenuto e la parola.
So, I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to Commissioner McGrath.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.